base jumpers back in the day used to write a letter that when they went in base jumping would get read. And that's kind of what the military does. They expect bad outcomes, and it's worth it. But we in the outdoor world are like, well, if we're safe enough and do things right and don't act like those people, and then we'll be okay. And I'm being a little bit sarcastic there, but I do think a more realistic appreciation would be better. My name is Will Gadd, and I'm an adventure sports pro athlete, speaker, guide, dad from Kamloops, Alberta. I'm 56 years old, and I've been doing adventure sports since before I could walk. My family are climbers, and the funny family story is that my mom only stopped climbing with me when she was pregnant with me, when she could no longer see her feet. And she went into the doctor for her 8-month checkup, and she had this massive burn from doing a Dulfer sits rappel. And the doctor is like, why are you rappelling as an 8-month pregnant woman? And yeah, so that's where I come from. I was out in the mountains before I was alive. As a kid growing up in Calgary, the climbing community had a lot of accidents and fatalities. And the memorial events for those accidents were always at my house. So at least a couple times a year there'd be a wake for some climber that had died. And as a kid I was like, this is awesome. Everybody comes over, gets hammered, and I drink the remainders of the beer bottles. This is great. They were the best parties ever, honestly, legendary parties in Calgary, but it was always for somebody that died. And as a kid you just accept that. You're like, this is how it is. You don't have a choice. It's like, maybe it's like kids in war zones or something. It just is what it is. There's nothing you can do about it. Kids have no power. So for me, I just accepted that. I just thought that was normal, that you'd have parties at your house semi-regularly for people who died in the mountains. I was like, people do that, people die, that's how it is. In my early teens, mid-teens was probably when I started thinking more about the consequences of these sports. I started to really notice patterns. Everybody who's an alpine climber that I knew, if they kept at it long enough, they died. And it was a pretty conscious choice on my part to start pursuing things that had high levels of technical ability but were in less complex environments. I couldn't articulate it well as a teenager, but I was like, people seem to live longer rock climbing. I'm gonna stick with that. Or ice climbing, it has more hazard, but I still love it, so I'll keep doing that. And it was weird because I thought about this quite consciously at the time and going, yeah, some sports are a lot more dangerous than others, and I am okay with that hazard, but I don't want to do a lot of this big alpine climbing. And then I broke that rule a lot and did a lot of it. The first time I had to deal with a fatality in my mountain world, I met up with some guys at the Put-In who were legends in California kayaking, and I was like, I get to paddle with these guys, and my little group was 3 tight friends, and these California guys join our group. They're legends. I'm so stoked. I'm 20 years old. We're paddling with the legends, and bombing down the river. We're speed scouting. It's a very difficult run. Didn't have many descents at that time. It's mostly pretty continuous class 4 or 5 harder drops. So we've got the super strong team. We're bombing down the river, and we're speed scouting, which means the person in front gets to the drop, gets out of their kayak, looks, gives directions to everybody. So I get there, I'm in front, I'm like, it's this janky little drop. It's not serious by high-level kayaking standards. It's a maybe 6-foot little pour-over waterfall thing, but it's janky. And I'm like, everybody out, so we all look at it. And my friend Jimmy gets into his boat. And Jimmy is a world-class athlete, Olympic athlete, just a phenomenal, the most talented athlete I've ever known. Anyhow, this guy paddles over, pins vertically, so he's stuck in his kayak. The water's slamming into his back, and he's hanging there, and I can just see him through the tongue of water, and I'm like, oh, Jimmy's gonna die. And he's hanging down there like that, and so I go for my rescue gear, and because I'd had a crevasse rescue course at some point in my life, I'm elected to get him out, And so I got my gear, and I'm like, where am I going to set up this thing I've studied once, and somehow Jimmy surfs out sideways and gets out at the drop. And I'm like, holy shit, Jimmy lived, this is magic. And one of the California legends gets in his boat. And I'm looking at the guy, I'm 20, he's old, he's 30. Right? And I'm looking at him and I'm like, this is bad. Like, this guy should not be doing this. But he's also like the legend and I'm like the 20-year-old kid. So I'm like, hey, you know, the best I could come up with at that point in my life was Jimmy almost died. There's no way in hell I would run that drop. Like, and he just looks at me and he's like, I got this. And paddles off, pins vertically. And so now he's in the water and he's pinned vertically, and you know, I've got to come up with some kind of rescue scenario, so I'm trying to do that. And I tried a bunch of different things and was eventually able to set up a system to get him out. And you know, he's 5 or 6 minutes after he pinned, I was trying to push him up. I could actually stand on a rock underneath this waterfall and he could still grab my hand. But when I finally figured out a rescue system with my friends to get him out, he wasn't breathing. And we couldn't get him breathing doing CPR on this rock on this beautiful California day. Jimmy and I, because we were the stronger paddlers in the group, are elected to paddle out and start a rescue. And I go back in with the rescue team at night. So now I've been on the go for like 24 hours straight, and I have to hike back into this deep, deep, deep canyon in California. And I get ahead of the rescue team. We hit the riverbed, and they can't move in that terrain. You know, I've just spent a lot of my life in that terrain. I can move. And so I'm like, I'll see you there. It's like a mile upstream. I'm hallucinating the whole time that Andrew, who I didn't think was going to be alive, is going to like jump over a rock and you know, try to kill me because I couldn't save him. You know, I'm up mentally. And finally I get to where the accident had happened, and I can't, my headlamp's too weak to see if Andrew's still on the rock or not. And so I'm pretty messed up, and I'm trying to like get out to the rock, and then I'm like, well, where are my friends? Because they have to get out too, and it's cold, and it's like they're going to be suffering. And finally the rescue team catches up, and I'm sitting there on this rock beside the river all night, like just a mess. And then in the morning I've got to like swim out there because I'm the only one that knows how to do that, and help get him into a bag, and then the machine comes and it's done, and you know, I hike back out. And Monday morning I'm at school. Like, I'm sitting at a desk trying to learn about something I don't remember very much of that year, honestly. And I didn't deal with that at all well. But I went back to school and, you know, broke up a really good relationship and did tremendous quantities of dangerous things, because that's you know, unfortunately, I think there's kind of a ripple effect of these things. And I don't know how I survived that year at school. I have no idea. You know, with time, things started to make sense again. But my response was not, like, I didn't kayak for a year and a half after that. I was like, a drop so small and random could kill somebody just didn't make any sense to me. Like, but I did a lot of training. I like got way better at my systems. Like, Andrew would be alive today. Knowing what I know today, he'd be alive. And that sucks too. You know, when I first started having incidents or reading about them, it was like I wanted them to end. I just wanted like the explanation, and we're done here. We've learned and we're going to move on. And as I've gotten older and had difficult things happen in life, both in the mountains and in my personal life, just my personal life, I think what I've realized is it's just an endless process. And that may not be very comforting, but it's true. Like, we got to go through these things, and that is actually what matters. It's the going through it, whatever it is, and developing your own answers and your own viewpoint, and just chewing on stuff. And if you don't, then it gets larger and larger. I think that's where I'm at today. It's like, I realize it's not ever going to end. I'm not going to wake up and be like healed from that river incident 30 some years ago, but I can use it. I don't want to be healed. I used to want to be fixed. I don't want to be fixed. I just want to do better. I think if we go into these sports with the understanding of what may be on the other side, good and bad, then we tend to blame ourselves less when there are incidents and accidents. Like, that self-blame and self-hatred is really strong. And if we can go into it and go, right, people do make mistakes, and in my culture people recognize that people make mistakes, then it helps a little bit on the backside. It also helps during the day that you're out there. It's like, wow, really low probability things do happen. And not just may, but will. This is a critical thing to understand. Things will go wrong. And so in our decision making today, how can we use that to do better? The biggest thing we as a community can do to do better is to share our incidents and be open about them, whether it's like small things like my binding broke all the way up to, wow, my really good friend died. And then we normalize that. I'd say I've been doing mountain sports seriously now for at least 40 years. And in that time, I have lost 26 friends, give or take, that I've drank beers with and gone out into the mountains with and had trips with. And these are people that I would be really excited to see in any airport in the world if I ran into them. And that number's not wildly out of line with people who do these sports for a long time. And there's that continual load of when's the next call going to come? Who's going in next? And because it's going to happen. And that's one part of this is for me, I do feel that continual sense of, I wouldn't call it dread, but I know it's coming. And I've gotten better at dealing with those calls over the years. I'm not angry about them anymore. I used to be angry. Now I'm like, okay, this happens, and how can I help or at least get out of the way of the people who are helping? So that's one part of this for me, and I think long term that's why people quit these mountain sports. I've had a number of friends who quit mountain sports because they just simply can't handle the carnage. And if I ever quit these sports, it's not going to be because I'm bored of the mountains. It's going to be because I just don't want to get calls anymore. And then as far as these incidents, it's every time I have an incident, whether it's a rescue, I've responded to a lot of accidents in the mountains, and I go home and I think, is this really worth it? Because it's not. This stuff is not worth it on any individual level, me included. If I crash my paraglider tomorrow, obviously that day wasn't worth it. And so I wrestle with that. I wouldn't say continually, but it's like, do I really need to do this? And of course the answer is no, I don't need to do it. But it also is the way that I do find meaning, and I have to have that answer. I have to sit there, and sometimes I don't do anything that's higher risk in the mountains for anywhere from a year to whatever time after one of these incidents. I have to sit there and figure out, is this still worth it or not? And every time, it's a process I have to go through. I write about it, I sit there, I think about it, and I ask myself, what kind of choices do I want to make in the coming year? Or because again, I'm no better or different than the people who had those accidents, whether it was with my group or not. I'm equally fallible, that's for sure. This is going to sound really weird to say as a pro athlete, but I think if more people actually understood the outcomes that are inherent in these sports, less people would probably do them. And that would be okay with me. When I go out the door, if somebody has been through a really hard experience, we get along really well. Because we know what's on the other side if we get it wrong. So we go out the door, we're on the same page. It's like, okay, we may still be doing things that would be considered absolutely nut bar. But if it's spin drifting, we're really happy turning around because we've seen what happens on the backside of that. So we turn around more and don't push as hard. But that doesn't make us bulletproof, and we have to know that. I'm working on a book called Surviving and Thriving in High Hazard Environments. And some of it's from the corporate side of things. I've got this great interview with the person who ran occupational health and safety for ExxonMobil. This guy is good at it. But I've also done interviews with people who worked in other high hazardous environments, including a guy who did a whole lot of really dangerous and difficult things in foreign countries for governments. Complicated situation. But that guy used a term that I thought was really interesting. And he says sometimes the juice is worth the squeeze. So the military knows that if they send 15 people in to do something really dangerous, some of them will die. They know that. And they go, okay, this is worth it. We're going to do this. And the guys who are going to do that job, they know that. They're going in there with that expectation. I think we in the outdoor industry should probably ask ourselves, is the juice worth the squeeze? Is the juice worth it? That day, that week, that month, that year, for that life? It's a good question. And I think everybody should have an answer.